All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome. It's a joy and honor to be here today with Alex Parker-Owen, who is a relationship mentor and coach and a good friend of mine. Alex, welcome to the show.
Thank you. That's great to be here with you, brother.
Yeah, great to be here with you too. Excited for this conversation. So, diving straight into the relationship juice that I think a lot of people are thinking about at this stage of our society. People are talking a lot about monogamy versus polyamory and how to navigate that. A lot of people seem dissatisfied with whatever paradigm they're in to some extent. I'm curious, how do you think about that spectrum and how do you navigate it in your 13-year marriage, 14-year marriage, however long it's been at this point?
Yeah, I think the first thing that comes up is this idea of not labeling what a situation is. And and then secondly, a lot of relationships are what we would call monogamous, but with desires that mean that people don't want to be monogamous. I heard somebody call it once fake monogamy, where people are in a monogamous relationship, but then they might cheat or have an affair. Um, and I think that's about communicating the desires that we have. So it's all great to say, oh, yeah, I'm in a monogamous relationship, but is that actually talking to the depth of what it is that we want to experience? And so, for us, it's a case of everything being communicated. There's this idea that we're always going to have desires or fantasies, whether it be about sex or intimacy of other kinds. And it's when we don't feel safe to be able to communicate what it is that we're experiencing or what desires that we have, that then becomes something toxic under the surface because it's not being given space to manifest. And whether that's manifesting in actually taking action or whether that's manifesting being able to share that, we have a crush on somebody, or this person's really attractive, or I'd be really interested in being with somebody else in whatever way that looks like. And so I think more importantly for me than this notion of is a relationship monogamous or polyamorous or something in between is, do you have the space and the safety to be vulnerable, to say what it is that you might want to experience? And, for us, it's a case of having made this decision that we are partners for life, that we are going to journey this life together no matter what. And if that's the kind of commitment that you make, and I think it's a blessing to find a partner where you feel so safe and secure in making that kind of commitment, then the notion of then potentially never having some sort of intimate experience with somebody else seems mad in a sense, because you're talking about 40, 50, 60, 70 years of life. And at the same time, if there is this unconditional commitment to journey this life together, then actually the notion of being with somebody else almost becomes insignificant, because it's like, well, what's one intimate experience with somebody else that is shared and talked about in an open way when we're talking about spending the rest of our lives together in that commitment?
Hmm. Really interesting, really interesting. I think I've heard you say something before about neither of you block something that organically arises for the other person. Could you
Mm.
share more about what that means? Does that mean if something is organically arising, it's just definitely a green light, or do you talk about it first? And sometimes it could be a no. How does that go for you guys?
Yeah, I guess in a sense, it is a green light for any kind of experience. I'm not just talking about um, a sexual experience, but an experience of any kind, that there is this acceptance that we are on this journey together, but we are both still individuals having this life experience. And so, if we were to say that, oh, if a situation is organically unfolding, then, let's have a quick conversation about it to check that it's all okay, is just going to, interrupt that organic unfoldment. And so it's a case of whatever situation we find ourselves in, being able to make a choice that feels aligned for us as individuals and engaging in that experience. And then knowing that that's something that will be talked about. There are no secrets. It's not a case of we have to tell each other absolutely everything that, comes into our field or our awareness. But there is just no concept for us of engaging in any kind of experience and then being like, oh, I'm not going to tell, the other person because it won't be understood, or I'm going to be judged, or whatever it is. And I think that's what comes up in a lot of relationships, is this notion of like, oh, a situation organically unfolded. Oh, but now I feel bad because um, maybe we didn't discuss this, or I feel bad because maybe I shouldn't have done that. And so it's put into secrecy. And then that secrecy it festers under the surface, and it changes then how we show up in the relationship. And so, it's really interesting because, you might think arriving at this point in a relationship means that, for example, both people are going out and having like sex with lots of other people, right? And that is just not, I mean, that's not the truth of our relationship at all. But there is something really powerful about knowing that if a situation were to arise where you feel a connection with somebody else, that is something that can be explored, and explored from a place of knowing this commitment that we have to each other, and almost feeling blessed by the fact that we have somebody else that we're journeying with that is already saying, it's okay to be you. It's okay to be you in a way that is authentic and genuine, and that I'm not going to stand in the way of you having authentic, genuine experiences.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Thanks for sharing. It feels like it requires a pretty high level of emotional maturity or emotional non-reactivity to be able to do that, because I think a lot of people, in theory, they love the idea of something like that. But then something happens, the other person goes to a festival and ends up having a threesome with Marjorie and Pam Bam or something, and comes home, and next thing you know, the partner is in shambles on the floor, and it's like, oh, in theory I thought it was okay, but now the reality of this is hitting me like a wrecking ball, and this is going to be tough to recover from. It's like, and and I think that happens to a lot of people who experiment with things that are on the more open side of the spectrum. They like it in theory, but then the actual emotional fallout is devastating for them. So I'm curious, do you feel you two have an unusually high level of emotional maturity and non-reactivity, or do you have an innate predisposition toward this type of thing? And have you had any unexpectedly high emotional upsurges when things have happened? Yeah, three questions there. We can unpack them more slowly, but I'm curious what comes up for you.
It's a journey. Like I can look back over the last 14 years, and certainly very early on in the relationship, even even the notion of, being on a night out and seeing um, my wife talking to somebody, there was a time where that would invoke jealousy in me. Like even the notion of, having a conversation, be like, oh, you're spending time with another guy, you're like engaging with, we're meant to be out together. Like all of this was really, really present. So it's not that that just wasn't there at any point, but it's almost like those opportunities arising lay the foundation to be able to move through them. At least in our experience, it's been a result of high emotional responses to situations, and whether that be something actually having occurred, or whether that just be dealing with our own sense of jealousy or control as a result of some perceived situation that that has certainly come up during during the last 14 years. And it's it's not a journey for everybody, I don't think, because it really does test you, and it invites you to start framing your response to situations in a different way. Like, very normal for somebody to feel jealous if their partner is getting attention from somebody else. But what is that jealousy? Where is that coming from? I believe it's because when we're in a relationship, we often bring into that this kind of subconscious sense of control, this subconscious sense of ownership of the other person. And as a result of that, there's a part of us that feels like we're being directly affected by the other person's actions. And it's realizing that that is actually pointing to something within us. It's not actually about the attention that your partner is getting that's making you feel jealous. It's that is a pointer to your own connection with your sense of self, your capacity to actually love somebody. And I mean really love somebody, not this mind created sense of love, which I think unfortunately a lot of people are in that space. This kind of egoic love that is actually conditional. I love you as long as you behave in these ways and as long as you don't do these things. And navigating situations like this allows you to be able to continually tap into this deeper sense of love. Like I love you for who you are and the connection we have. And when you view it like that, it's almost absurd to think like their actions, as long as we're not talking about actions that are intentionally meant to harm someone else, that actually the notion of their actions, their experience, their engagement with somebody else, for us to then be saying, oh, because of that, all of this love I have for you now is gone like that. I'm not feeling that anymore. It just seems almost ridiculous, because when you tap into that almost unconditional love for somebody else, I mean, that transcends everything else. By the nature of it being unconditional means that you are loving that person for who they are. You're loving them for the emergence of the shared space of what arises between the two of you. And then so there isn't anything that can be done that sullies that love. And that's where I think this egoic sense of love creates a lot of conflict and tension, because we think we deeply love somebody, but actually it's only as long as they play by the rules and don't cross the boundaries and all the rest of it. And actually that's part of the journey. It's in crossing a boundary that you're invited to go deeper and realize, okay, there's some part of me here that's being affected or triggered by that. What is that? Where does that come from? And in being open to doing that, you don't just get to explore experiences with other people, whatever that looks like. And in fact, that's almost secondary to the experience that you have internally, what changes within you as you allow these experiences to rise, and being able to step back and be told something and be like, yeah, I can feel a sense of jealousy arising. I can feel a sense of disrespect rising. So what is that? Where is that actually coming from? Because it's an illusion to think that that is being caused by the other person's actions. It's not. The other person's actions end up being a mirror for something that was already existing inside of us.
Powerful stuff. I find this topic so fascinating. I'm going to ask a little more about it. I'm really curious to hear more specific examples. So I'm curious, have you had experiences on with both sides of the fence? Like on one hand, an experience where you went out and something spontaneously happened, and then you came home and told her about it, and you guys navigated that. And the other side of the fence, where she went out, something spontaneously happened, she came back, told you, and you guys navigated it. I'm curious, have you had those experiences? And if so, what happened? What happened in the, if you could share a story? And specifically, like, I just mean, what happened emotionally when you got home and shared about whatever happened? You don't have to share intimate details about what transpired, but I'm more curious about how the emotions were navigated if those situations occurred.
Yeah, it's the navigation, at least in more recent years, has come as a result of being able to presence what is arising in a way that leaves us separate, not entirely, but allows us to step back from it. So some experience happens, we come back and we talk about it. And, one of us shares and the other person says, oh, I'm feeling uncomfortable about that. I'm I'm feeling perhaps a little bit hurt by that. And one of the key things in navigating it then is the person that's sharing is totally welcoming of whatever is arising from the other person. So, it would be very easy to sort of, have an experience, come back and share, and the other person's like, oh, that's actually making me feel something that is challenging to navigate. And then the response being like, oh, but you said that the organic stuff was all okay. So why are you being like this with, and it'd be very easy for that to kind of, come in at that point. And so there is this total openness of communication in sharing, in not, keeping secrets. And then there has to be this openness to whatever is being shared in response. It's recognizing that navigating that communication is about both of us giving space to whatever it is that's arising, and not shutting that down. And and silence ends up being a really powerful part of that navigation. It can be very easy when somebody shares something to want to counter it, or to almost say, oh well, that's not fair, on me, like that you're sharing this. Oh, that's not fair because I was playing by the rules or within the boundaries that we set. And so in giving space for that level of communication to arise where everything is welcome allows you to allows you to see what there is to be gained from it. And then I think on the other side that there is this joy, perhaps not joy, there is this celebration from the other in almost being able to say, I'm so pleased that you had that experience. That sounds beautiful. It's really lovely that happened for you. You know, I'm glad that you got to have that experience. You know, and in that sense, it's the same way as we would do with a close friend, you know, who comes around and says, "Oh, I had this really beautiful, you know, intimate experience, whatever that looks like," and we'd be like, "That's great, bro. Like, well done. I'm so pleased for you. That's fantastic." And it's doing that same thing within the context of the relationship without allowing this sense of like we're together being a reason as to why we're not able to share in the joy of the experience that the other person had. And at the same time, you know, certainly in earlier parts of the relationship, something has occurred. And I remember, you know, one time I was sharing, and it's not, you know, a really, it's not like I went off and had sex with them. I didn't even kiss them. But at that point, it was an experience that crossed the line of intimacy where we were at. And the space that I was in was just like, oh, hey, I just had this experience. And the response was, what, you did what? And, you know, all of this like anger and arising. And so then we navigated that. And from, as I was saying, that from my position in sharing that, then it was like, okay, I now have to be totally accepting of this anger. I have to be totally accepting of the way in which, you know, my wife is being with me. It's not like a, oh, well, I thought it was okay. And so I had this expectation that you thought it was going to be okay. You just have to drop that. And then when you navigate that, you come out the other side stronger. You come out the other side more connected. You come out the other side with a better understanding of where the relationship's at, where you want the relationship to be, and a better understanding of what it is within you that was so activated by it.
Amazing. Have at least one more question about this topic. I feel like some people are going to be saying to themselves, like, man, all of this sounds really great in theory. I am wondering, like, what is the level of experience of this person who's sharing this? Like, how far into this have they actually gone? Is all of this being shared from a place of, yeah, the farthest we ever went into this is like I kissed someone one time, or is it like you guys have you navigated like substantial depths of this where I don't, yeah, if there's some way you can indicate this with whatever level of privacy you want to keep for yourself, like what is the actual level of experience here with sort of going all the way into this exploration?
I mean, that's a very succinct way of putting it. You know, we have gone um, all the way into this exploration at different points. Um, I mean, even saying that, right? There's always a level further that one could go. Um, but yeah, to say that this is not sharing a bunch of theory that sounds great, and you know, it's not that it hasn't been tested. You know, this theory has been tested. It has been put into practice, and what's almost beautifully ironic about it is that we are closer as a result of navigating this, as a result of taking this theory to, you know, the extreme, as it were, that we are actually closer, we are more connected because of it. And you know, I don't think that's something that is perceived by a lot of people in relationships. There is this notion of having some sort of intimacy, whatever that looks like, with somebody else would break a relationship. And in fact, it does break a lot of relationships because of the way in which it's navigated, because there isn't the openness and the communication. There isn't the willingness to stand back and say, I accept whatever emotional response is coming as a result of this. And and so it's really interesting, I think, that the act itself of being intimate with somebody else when you're in a committed relationship can be both something that breaks the relationship and enhances it, depending on the way in which you navigate it. And it's hard. It is a journey. There has to be a willingness and a desire to navigate the really challenging stuff that arises once you reach a point in a relationship where you think, actually, maybe this is a space that we could move into. And if it's a space that we want to move into, I'm certainly not preaching that this is where all relationships should be or should get to. It's perfectly okay to decide that that's not what you want in a relationship. But there's a difference between deciding it's not what you want and pretending it's not what you want.
Yeah, that's powerful. And just making me think that if you haven't considered it before, I feel like this could be a really powerful area to help people navigate as a coach and mentor is this area of opening up relationships or transitioning from something completely closed to something, more open without labels, or navigating infidelity within monogamy. It just sounds like you, not that you said anything about infidelity, but just it seems related to this topic of, yeah, these desires and how they get expressed. It sounds like you might be especially well suited to help people navigate that very, very painful and difficult topic for a lot of people. Um, yeah, just figured I'd mention that. I don't know if you've ever considered helping people with that or if you have already helped people with that.
It's definitely something that I've considered. It hasn't come up in the work that I've done with couples up to this point. And yeah, I think it's almost like this notion of, in a really simple sense, whatever it is that arises, there's this notion of what you have done to me that I think causes a lot of the tension and the conflict. I can't believe you did that. How could you do that to me? And once we step out of that frame and realize, well, you weren't doing anything to me. You you were, having an experience, something happened. And yes, there are emotions and tensions and triggers that are related to that. But it's stepping out of this kind of, you know, me and you, right and wrong dynamic. It's not that black and white. So nothing was ever done to us. And in recognizing that, because when that arises, that's like, well, what part of me is showing up to say like, oh, you have done this to me, because that's not a partnership. If we're saying you did this to me, you didn't do this to me, I feel this way because of you, then we're not working in partnership. That's two people kind of protecting their own sense of self. And the partnership is an openness to recognize that the other person isn't doing it to us. I mean, aside of situations where somebody has intentionally done something harmful or malicious, I'm certainly not talking about that sort of behavior. But when it's authentic and genuine and organic, then we can step back from this notion. We can step into a sense of safety that they weren't doing anything to us. And so we don't need to defend ourselves because we haven't been attacked. It wasn't about us, it was about them. And in a really simple sense, I think that just that notion alone, if that can be presenced in a relationship, if that can be communicated and navigated, the spaciousness that opens up within each individual and the spaciousness that opens up in the relationship is, I think there's potential for, infinite spaciousness there. And it certainly creates within me a huge sense of excitement. And that's not an excitement of what are all the wonderful experiences I'm going to have with other people in, the course of my life. But this notion of, we are so grateful and honored and blessed to have shared this journey up to this point and to navigate to this place that where we are. And then I'm like, okay, where are we going to be in 60 years' time? Like, what's the depth of spaciousness that's going to continue to arise over the next 60 years? And what will that give rise to? What will emerge in that space? And I say emerge because ultimately it's not about the individual experiences that we might have. It's about what emerges in the relationship as a result of continually navigating, continually having these experiences and sharing in that joy and pleasure and love with each other.
Beautiful, beautiful. And that quality you're pointing to, this kind of radical self-responsibility for one's emotions, it sounds like a quality that would be really valuable in all relationships because so many relationships are characterized by a dynamic of, oh, why is this person always, making me feel these things? Or, oh, why do they say that? They know that makes me feel this or that. It feels like quite a profound paradigm shift to instead shift into the radical view that no, this person cannot, make me feel anything. They're acting as a mirror or a catalyst for whatever's already within me on some level, and I'm feeling that, in relation to whatever is being mirrored here, and what do I have to look at when these emotions come up? That sounds really powerful. I'm curious if you could share a bit more about your journey of how you discovered that and how you decided to cultivate that and how you have cultivated that.
I think first to say that I think people listening to this could feel like just everything is acceptable and appropriate, and that's not the case. There are certainly occasions where in any kind of relationship, we say something or do something and the other person has an emotional experience as a result, that they are hurt, and that there are certainly situations and times where it's appropriate to say, I'm sorry. I recognize how what I said or did is going to hurt you in some way, and that wasn't my intention. And there's a subtlety there because that's not us saying, it's not us admitting that, yes, okay, what I did has caused you to feel this way, that those feelings are are the other person's responsibility. But we can certainly acknowledge the the part that we played in that hurt or that pain arising in the other person. And so we have to be able to, essentially admit when we were wrong, admit when we missed the mark in how something was delivered or how something was said, and to just say, I'm sorry. But that sorry is not, I'm sorry I caused you to feel that way. It's I'm sorry that perhaps I didn't have sufficient awareness to recognize that behaving or speaking in this way would have that effect on you. I hadn't expected that. I hadn't foreseen that that was a possibility. Thank you for letting me know. And I can, kind of put that in my subconscious to be aware of how to behave around you in the first place. Because depending what the relationship is, everybody has different boundaries, right? And so, whereas my wife and I are in a place where our boundaries are very very aligned, the relationship with my father or my mother or a friend is going to be very different because we haven't been on that journey together. And so almost certainly, my boundaries are going to be different to where, say, the boundaries of my mother are. And so there has to be a respect for that. There has to be this willingness to say, okay, from my perspective, what I did was acceptable, appropriate, but I recognize that from where you are, your, subjective reality, where you are, your perspective, that that this was a line crossed for you, that this was hurtful to you. And okay, I'm sorry for that. And yeah, I wanted to include that because I don't want this to seem like any kind of bypassing the challenges and the dynamics of that show up in a lot of different relationships. And to answer your question, the in a really simple sense, the switch for me after having a very emotionally heartbreaking, felt like my world had fallen apart kind of overwhelming experience, that following that I came to realize that I don't ever want to be so emotionally affected by anyone or anything external to me ever again in my life. I don't want to give that power to be so affected to anybody or anything outside of myself. And that wasn't an immediate switch. It wasn't like I, decided that and then I was never emotionally affected ever again. But what it means is in the doing that, that when we are then so emotionally affected, it's an invitation to say, okay, well, what do I need to look at here? How much deeper do I need to go? What was it about this experience that caused such an emotional reaction? But all the while having this driving force behind us that says, I don't ever want to be that affected. I don't want to give that power over to somebody else. And if you make that decision, and it is a choice, you choose whether that's what you want, how you want to live your life. And if you make that choice, then each painful experience is an opportunity for growth. It's not just another painful experience that I don't deserve and this isn't fair. And how could you do that to me? It's recognizing what arose. It's communicating. It's sharing how we were affected with whoever in whatever kind of relationship, but with this notion of I don't want that to be the case. And so that we deepen that a little bit more. And then another painful experience arises and we remind ourselves, well, I don't want to be able to be so emotionally affected by anything external to me. And now that has happened. So I need to go a little bit deeper. There's more work to do here. And so again, the pain then is an opportunity for growth. If we choose to see it that way, the pain is a gift for us to deepen our sense of peace, deepen our sense of being okay no matter what happens. And at least in my experience, that was a choice that I want to be in control of how severely affected I am. And that's not to say that the pain goes away. I think pain is inevitable, but suffering is optional. And I think that when pain comes in and we attach a story to it, we attach some mental narrative to it, then the pain moves into suffering. Pain is very short-lived. It's often a visceral reaction that we actually feel in our bodies in some way. But that energy doesn't often stick around for very long. But once a story becomes attached to it, once some narrative about how this is unfair or I don't deserve this or whatever it might be, then that pain moves into suffering, and suffering can last a lifetime.
Yeah, well said. That's that's interesting. What it brings up for me is, on my spiritual journey, I've seen different people speaking about levels of kind of attachment or detachment. I've seen some spiritual communicators go as far as to say, um, true love is only possible if there is no attachment, which I don't I don't resonate fully with that personally. I feel like there's something about that that feels like off or kind of bypassy to me. And I'm not saying that that's what you're saying. I'm just saying this is what it reminds me of. And for myself, I feel like there's an inherent part of being a human being where we do naturally form levels of attachment with our dearest loved ones. And for me personally, I want to be a human being. My spirituality includes being a human being as well as being whatever this infinite, spacious mystery is that is emanating forth as a human being and everything in between. And so, God forbid if something happened to one of my dearest loved ones, something, you know, uh, not good happened. I don't want to be just like sitting on a lotus flower in serene bliss and being like, oh, well, that doesn't affect me. That's just part of the illusion. And so, and again, not saying that all this is what you're saying, it's just something it reminds me of, like just this topic. I would like to, I feel like grief is a natural response to, you know, certain events in life or things happening to one's loved ones, and grief in a way honors the depth of the love that you felt for that person. If they were to pass on, transition to the next world or something. And so, yeah, so I want to be able to feel grief. And at the same time, I really like what you said about pain is inevitable, suffering is optional, because I think you're pointing at something really profound there, which is, you know, to use the example of grief, I want to be able to feel the organic grief that arises in a situation where something happens to one of my dearest loved ones. I don't, however, want to turn that into like a story or a complex that just keeps looping in my mind forever and completely destroys me as a human being. I want to feel those crashing tsunami waves of emotion and just be able to sit there in it and feel it and let it crack me open and weep. And yet I also want to, even through that, be able to maintain a level of rootedness in something that knows that it's all okay no matter what is happening, something that is just deep rooted in this kind of oceanic peace that transcends and includes, but vastly transcends, in my experience, whatever does happen in this lifetime. There's a peace in the depths of our being that is undisturbed by whatever happens in this lifetime. And it's not that it's undisturbed because it's um, you know, psychopathic or something. It's just that the nature of the depths of our being is an imperturbable peace or an unblemishable heart of pristine, stainless love, abiding grace in my experience. And so I would love to be in touch with that kind of changeless beatitude throughout, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, while also still being a human being who feels those slings and arrows and honors those experiences without being destroyed by them and without turning them into, suffering beyond what is actually organically arising or actually like native to this body, without the mind creating a big kind of neurotic knot around it that then sinks the ship kind of thing. So, yeah, that came up for me. I'm curious how that lands for you.
Yeah, very, very well said. Um, yeah, it's like we can think that if something happened to a dear loved one, that we would be devastated by that emotionally, but not as you said, it destroyed it would be, of course, feeling the pain in whatever form that takes as a result of, somebody passing on to the next life, but knowing that we would still be okay, that we would be devastated but not destroyed by it. We would be overcome at times by the waves of emotions because of the love that we feel for that person. But then without having the mind create a whole narrative around that, that we wouldn't be destroyed by it. We would be, and in that way we almost are more accepting of and welcoming of the pain, because we know it doesn't mean, the end of us. And I think there's this sometimes confusion that the pain is bad, that feeling those things is is such a challenge for us that it's almost like, oh, if I don't continue to feel this grief perpetually, I'm not honoring the person that that has died or that has moved on, or whether it's not grief, whether it's a different kind of pain of a breakup of a relationship. Grief can happen in that kind of context, but it's not something that consumes us. It's not something that has to consume us. It does in waves, but it doesn't perpetuate. And we are not saying that, oh, if I don't continue to feel grief, then maybe I didn't love this person as much as I thought it was. And I'm honoring their memory by holding this, you know, continuous grief for that person. Because at that point, then our lives are destroyed. And so we recognize that, yes, certain things occurring in our lives would be devastating, but we would also be okay. As you put it, that deeper peace within us is something that we can always return to. And in doing that, I believe it actually gives us the opportunity to more fully step into the emotion of grief. We can almost more fully allow that wave of emotion to come in and perhaps even feel it more deeply, because there is this knowing of, and once this wave passes, I'm going to be okay. And in fact, I'm okay whilst I'm experiencing this wave. We don't have to view that wave as being a sense of like, oh, now I'm broken because I'm so overwhelmed by this. And so knowing that we will be okay no matter what happens, we invite in being able to more deeply embody those emotions. Because I think as well, a lot of the time that something like grief can persist because there is this notion of, if I was to feel this in its full force, I would not be capable. I don't have the power to be able to fully feel this grief. And so then what we do is we feel, a slightly lower level, like 90% of the grief continually. And we can stay in that state where we're not fully experiencing the whole emotion because we don't feel like we're capable of doing that. We don't have the capacity to do that. And so if we know that we're going to be okay, that we might be devastated by something, but we're not going to be destroyed by it, then we can say, okay, well, then hit me with everything. Let me really fully experience this, and let that be, that honor to whatever it is that's been lost. And then at any point in the future where it might come back or not, we can almost recognize that, well, I had that experience where I felt the full force of the grief that shows the attachment and the love that I had for this person. And that is absolute. That happened. And whether or not I ever have such an experience of grief for the same thing again in the future doesn't change the fact that I had that experience. So we don't need to hold on to it to honor what was lost. And actually we can say, I I know this deeper peace is here within me. And so I am capable. I am open to fully experiencing this pain that's coming in. And I can fully embody it. I can feel every facet of it. And then I can choose to return to a place of peace. And, and then we can still have love for what is lost. We don't need to stay in grief for what is lost. That doesn't have to be something that is perpetual. We can experience that, and then we can just hold the love for what was lost. Like the whatever it was might be gone in some sense, but our love for it doesn't go. It's not like that because the thing isn't there before in the way that it was, that our love goes with it. That love stays connected to that in the experiences that we had with that thing or that person, in the memory that we have for that thing and that person. And so I feel like that's how we can honor the things that are lost, in realizing that our love for them goes on. And and that brings a greater sense of peace to our lives. We're honoring this person, but we're feeling that through love. We're not feeling it through grief. And so we have moments of devastation, but we don't allow our lives to be destroyed by the really painful, challenging things that arise.
Yeah, I love what you're sharing. That was beautiful, and feeling things all the way through to completion is a beautiful idea. And I also feel called to just in this moment honor honor the people who have been utterly destroyed by grief, because there are some things that happen in this world that I have no idea how I'd respond to them. I've never been through some of the deepest pains. I mean, we live in a world where families are being torn apart by, landmines and bombs, or children are literally being abducted, and you don't know if they're alive or dead. And I really can't fathom. I can't fathom some of those scenarios. I don't know how I would respond. God forbid if things like that happened, it might break me. I might spiral into alcoholism and just throw my life away. I really don't know. I honestly don't know. And so I feel like I just wanted to express that level of humility and make it clear that I'm not claiming to be like so deeply established in God nature that, I'm certain that nothing could ever rock me or something like that. Because this world is crazy. This world is dark. This world is, it's all the things. It can be very heavenly. It can be utterly hellish. And so, yeah, just wanting to be sure that nothing I said people would take as like shaming somebody who has been utterly destroyed by grief, because I think some people view that as like just a lifelong thing. Like, no, you don't know this depth of grief, and I will never recover from it, and neither would you, kind of thing, and you just have no idea. I don't know. I don't know the deepest grief people have experienced on this planet. Um,
Yeah, and I think that's a really great way, a really great point to make around it, that having this kind of conversation can almost seem like we were saying in terms of the relationship, is it all theory, but what have you put into practice? And I feel called to say as well that for everything we've talked about here, it is also okay to be completely consumed by grief, to be destroyed about it. It's not saying that it's wrong to do that, because I think we all have different journeys to go on in this lifetime. And perhaps somebody's journey is to spend a life continually suffering, because that's what's being called for, their own particular journey. And there's nothing wrong with that. This is just about, at least in my own experience, having dealt with different kinds of grief, that there is another option. It's just kind of saying that it doesn't have to be that way. It can be that way. People can choose for it to be that way. And that a lot of the time is a subconscious choice. We're not really choosing to want to be that. But it can also be a conscious choice. Maybe somebody says, I want to suffer. There's something that feels like I need to be in this suffering. And that is working for me. Maybe for that person, the suffering is honoring what or who has been lost. So it's just recognizing that is not inevitable, that there is another option, that there is being okay amidst it all. And there is knowing that however it unfolds for you is perfectly okay, that there is no judgment in how somebody chooses to navigate that. But I just think there is tremendous power in knowing that there is a choice in the process, that there is power within us that allows us to navigate things in a way that is directed through our conscious awareness, through our conscious attachment to pain and suffering, as opposed to believing that I don't have a choice. This is just my suffering and there's nothing I can do about it.
Yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. Um, Shifting gears a little bit, wanted to ask you a couple more questions. Um, yeah, just really honoring that previous part of the conversation that hit really deep for me. Contemplating on 14 years of marriage that you've been in, that's a long time, and really congratulating you both for that achievement. I'm curious if you were asked to crystallize the keys to the kingdom, as it were, the most fundamental principles or approaches, say the top 3 to 5 secrets that have allowed you to create a flourishing 14-year marriage, what would those be?
A willingness to endure, because that's, I believe, what a relationship is. It's endurance. You have to be willing to go through the really challenging stuff, the really triggering stuff, the really painful stuff. It's not viewing something like that as being like, oh well, things got really hard, so I guess the relationship's over then. And that's not to say that there aren't situations in which something arises and actually the most aligned course of action would be for a relationship to end. But I don't believe that's the case in a lot of relationships. So it's a willingness to endure the difficult stuff, to recognize that that is just as much a part of the relationship as the joy and the love and the laughter and everything else that is shared. And then I would say listening. And I don't mean the kind of listening that a lot of us do a lot of the time, which is actually like kind of this position of, oh, well, if I'm not talking, then I'm just waiting to talk. I'm waiting for the next thing that I'm going to input into the conversation. And waiting to talk is not listening. So it's this real depth of giving space to what the other person is saying. And in my experience, when we're not deeply listening, and that can almost even be a conscious intention to tell ourselves, I'm really going to listen here. Because when we're not doing that, even if we're on the surface focused on what the other person is saying, there is a there is a subtext, there is a subconscious or even energetic element that the other person is interpreting if we're not giving them our full attention. And that is often not recognized by the other person on a conscious level, but it's picked up subconsciously. And so then that changes how that person is sharing. That's changing how that person is perceiving it. And it's almost the difference between, is that person getting a subconscious energetic signal that says you are being heard, you are being seen, or is the signal that's being sent across because we're not really listening that, oh, yeah, what you've got to say actually isn't fully important to me because I'm doing some other, background stuff. So it's really listening and having a capacity to say, I'm going to give you this space. What I have to input into this is not important at this time. And then the other one that comes up for me is silliness. And I've said this for many years that I in some ways don't think we would be where we're at in our relationship if it wasn't for the silliness, for our capacity to engage in nonsense, to engage in childlike behaviors, to do things that seem pointless, but to be able to do that in a way that feels free and authentic for us to express in that way and for that to be held by the other person and it to not be judged. I have seen in many relationships where someone behaves in a way that would be characterized as silly, and the response from the other person is some form of judgment. And so this willingness to be silly with each other and to hold space for that, and then as that evolves to even invite silliness in and to be able to share in that together, it's almost as if we're then connected, almost as if our inner children then are having an opportunity to connect with each other through the way in which we're behaving. And yeah, I find that to be an incredibly powerful practice.
Gorgeous. Yeah, that's amazing. I really resonate with all three of those, and the listening is a continual practice for me for sure. And yeah, the inner child silliness is so beautiful. We also engage in a fair bit of just silliness and playfulness, and I think that's massive, and that's probably something that doesn't get talked about enough. Yeah, can you be childlike together? Can you be free and silly? And one other thing I wanted to ask about is men's work. You and I have done a lot of men's work together. We've sat in a men's circle for probably almost a couple years now. Maybe not quite a couple years, year and a half, something like that. I'm wondering um, how this whole conversation connects to men's work, if at all, for you, and generally, how would you say men's work has helped you in your life or in your relationship?
Feels like a lot of what we talked about here, this willingness to be vulnerable and to be open and to not have secrets. It feels like men's work for me has been an extension of that has allowed me to explore those notions outside of the context of my marriage. That in some ways the relationship with my wife has been what has first allowed me to start being more authentic and stepping into my a deeper sense of self and to explore things and to be vulnerable. And yeah, for me, like men's work has been this beautiful sacred space that has allowed me to share things or be a certain way or put myself out there or share something that is causing a sense of perhaps nervousness or anxiety to arise, and then stepping into it and doing it anyway. And I think there's something really powerful that it's different from perhaps what I would share or not share or whatever lines I might have with particular um, guys that I'm friends with. That there's something about coming into this space with at least at some point, essentially strangers. But they're shared knowing that we're all there to want to deepen our sense of self or want to grow in some way or develop in some way, that, yeah, it is a huge invitation for us to test those personal boundaries that we have. And so for me, it's been beautiful to, almost take part of that journey that's come through in the relationship with my wife and say, okay, well, that's now something that I can do on a broader spectrum. That's something I can do where it's more uncomfortable, where I feel more vulnerable, where I feel, more anxiety coming through at points, because it's like, well, all of that in some respect is there for every single other person in the circle. Yes, we're all at different points on our journeys, but I believe that everybody is experiencing some amount of that discomfort, and this shared agreement to say we're all here, we're all happy to be uncomfortable to some extent together, and that we're not going to judge each other for whatever it is that arises. And yeah, seeing even some of the changes in my life that have come in the last 18 months, whatever it is that we've been in a men's group together, that, yeah, it's allowed me to explore things that perhaps before I would never have explored, or perhaps before I would never even thought of the concept of exploring. And then it kind of comes up and you feel like, oh, this is really challenging and triggering for me, but hey, I'm here, so I'm going to do it anyway. And then and then that is progress, not just within the context of the men's circle. That's then something that I can take away from that, and I can use that almost that opportunity to test our courage that comes from that space, and I can bring that back into the relationship with my wife. I can bring that into the relationships with friends, the relationship with my mum and my dad.
Hmm. Yeah, that was beautiful. A couple threads that jumped out at me there were vulnerability and authenticity. Really feels like we make a practice of being vulnerable and meeting our edge and going to the edge and being seen in that, making ourselves vulnerable and letting ourselves be seen by a group of people in that vulnerability, in that authenticity, in that discomfort. And that therefore widens it, our edge expands, it broadens. We become more okay being vulnerable and being authentic and letting the edge continue to expand. And yeah, that just allows us to bring more of that vulnerability and authenticity into all of our other relationships, as well as, if we're people like you and me who have a vocation to do things like this and broadcast messages on a larger scale to people, it allows a deeper settling in and a deeper comfort with doing that and letting ourselves be seen and taking off the masks, even in a context like this and being able to show up in a really real, authentic, vulnerable, honest way. So yeah, I think that's a great thread to pick up on among so many that could be talked about with men's work. I really feel like it's a beautiful, holistic holistic evolution modality, you could say. We really explore so many facets of the jewel of human life and lean into so many facets of not only what it is to be a man, but just what it is to be a human being and an infinite being, a living soul, and just exploring the full spectrum of life. So, yeah, so thanks for sharing that, brother. Hmm. And one final question here, or maybe two final questions. How does this conversation connect to the coaching that you do, the coaching and mentoring? And could you share a little bit about what your approach is in that work?
Yeah, I think firstly, what comes up is that in saying being a relationship mentor and coach, that isn't just about a relationship with another person. That's about the relationship that we have with ourselves and navigating that, and the relationship that we have with things in our lives or emotions in our lives or concepts in our lives. You know, everything in this world is governed by relationship. Everything is in relationship to everything else in some form or other. And so the relationship is about, it's almost about how we're showing up in relation to, whether that be a person or whether that be a situation in our life, or, you know, emotional challenges or pain. And so it's that, for me, a broader definition of relationship, as opposed to just being that, you know, working with couples. And for me, the the framework that I often use when diving into whatever it is that's coming up for someone is perspective, presence, and progress. And the notion of this is that we always have the capacity to have, choose if we want to, a different perspective on a situation. A lot of the time, we're under the illusion that a situation is good or bad, that it's joyful or painful, but the situation is just what the situation is. It's our perspective on it that gives it whatever it is that's arising from it. So it's recognizing that we get to choose the perspective that we have. And that doesn't mean that we can just flick a switch and change our perspective and everything becomes, you know, rainbows and unicorns. But it's recognizing that is possible, as opposed to a lot of the time we believe that our perspective is already predetermined by the situation itself or by the person. And so it's bringing new perspective to a situation, a perspective that offers value or insight. And then in having done that, we bring presence to it. We give space to really notice what's there, to notice what emotions are connected perhaps to the perspective that we have. We bring presence and space to recognize what's changed as a result of the perspective. And we don't run away from any of what's arising. And we actually give space to allow it to be, and we give it space to allow it to change and to transform. And then in doing this, we almost inevitably make progress in whatever area, whether that's towards a goal or whether that's in our relationship with a you know, recurrent pattern that might be showing up in our lives, whether that be progress in how affected we are by emotions. And so we make some progress, but the progress isn't just something that happens. The progress is a mindset. It's it's stepping into wanting there to be progress, and it's becoming really aware of when that progress happens. It's bringing in this sense of observation, of noticing when progress has happened and celebrating that. You know, our minds are wired to see the negative. The mind is wired to see all the things that we got wrong or that we didn't do or that didn't go right, or how we planned. But it's not wired to see all of the little wins along the way. And so once we give space to not just make the progress, but to really notice when that progress is almost happening of its own accord, because we're willing to shift our perspective and we're willing to bring presence to the situation. And then it's like, oh, hey, actually, yeah, I am a little bit further along in whatever area of my life. And perhaps I hadn't noticed that. And in doing that, we build momentum for more progress to be made. And, you know, I love this framework because the simplicity of it allows us to kind of overlay that over whatever type of engagement or modality is suited to that person. And so it can be used through coaching and mentoring, or the same framework can be used when doing meditations or somatic work. You know, we choose the modality that is really relevant and appropriate for whatever's arising in our lives. But we recognize that our perspective can always change, that we can choose to give space to be present for what it is that's arising for us. And then progress is always an option. And the more we notice, the more we allow ourselves to observe and celebrate the progress, the more progress we make.
Beautiful, beautiful framework. And yeah, I can really attest to the space that Alex holds. He's held space for me in a one-to-one context before, and can just say that he holds a really beautiful space where I felt really safe and held. And he asks really beautiful questions that open a lot. So can recommend his work. And still have two more questions, actually. One more arose, if you have time for a couple more here. Um, yeah, I remembered that we both love the book The Power of Now, and that that was an important book for you. And I'm curious if you were to concisely distill the essence of the awakening that you experienced in relation to that book and just the essence of the relation, the essence of the awakening you experienced, what was that for you?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, I kind of peripherally touched on this earlier that um, probably 10 or so years ago, my wife and I separated for about 6 months. Um, and it was that separation that resulted in me feeling like my whole world had fallen apart. Um, because my story, my identification was, you know, who I was in the context of the relationship. And so when that broke down, it felt like I'd actually been broken, even though I hadn't. And that led me to read the Power of Now, which had been on my bookshelf for I don't know how many years. It was a gift from my uncle and hadn't done anything with it. And then in this space of incredible emotional overwhelm, um, I was led to pick up the Power of Now. And in a really concise way, it was that book for me that made me realize that I am something more than all of the thoughts in my head and all of the emotions in my body, that I am an awareness of some kind that experiences those thoughts and those emotions. But in coming to realize that I'm something more than both of them allowed me to start changing how I was engaging with them. And it was that point in my journey that I made this decision to say, I never want to be that emotionally destroyed by anything or anyone external to myself ever again. And then there was a lot of times following that where I was not to the same extent, but you know, emotionally devastated. Um, but having this intention behind it all allowed me to navigate each situation, and I can you know say with absolute certainty that I have never been emotionally overwhelmed by something to that extent since then, even though I have had situations occur in my life which you might say are more painful or more difficult than the separation that we had. And that's not to say that I haven't felt the pain and been affected, but it was okay, that pain is there. That story that's attached to it that's resulting in suffering is there, but I'm something more than that.
Yeah, beautiful, beautiful. Interestingly, I also read The Power of Now. Uh, I may have read it for the first time or read some Eckhart Tolle many years ago, but it didn't fully land. And then after a devastating breakup in 2019, I read it and it really, really landed at that time. And the audiobook is just so good. I think if anyone has a Spotify membership, you can just listen to it for free on Spotify. So I recommend that book. But yeah, that awakening to just being vastly, infinitely more than our thoughts or infinitely more than this body. And it's still inclusive of the thoughts and the body and the human self for me, but discovering that deeper rootedness in formless peace, yeah, is a beautiful, beautiful journey. If you were to, final question, if you were to deliver one message to the world in this moment right now, what would it be?
Grateful. And if you think there is nothing in your life to be grateful for, then look harder and find opportunities every day to be grateful.
Beautiful. Love that. The art of Thanksgiving. Alex, it's been wonderful. Where can people find your work if they want to discover more?
Yeah, they can head over to my website, which is apocoaching.com. Um, and I always invite people to see what resonates on the site. And there's lots of links in there to contact me via message or email, or just go ahead and book a Zoom call. First call is always free, and I love just diving in with people to see whatever it is coming up for them. So um, yeah, if any of this resonates, please go ahead and book a call. And don't worry, I'm not gonna throw a sales pitch at you at the end of it. It really just is an opportunity for you to have space that's dedicated entirely to you, which in this world of constant distraction is a really powerful choice to make for yourself.
Beautiful, beautiful. We'll put that link in the description. Alex, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to talk to you, brother.
Thank you for having me. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
Mm, me too. Me too, bro. Take good care.
How much love?
Much love.